Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're working on this Honda E40 generator. This is Honda's first unofficial generator. And I say unofficial because it was never sold to the public. Honda's first generator was actually the E300, which came out in 1965. This one predates that one by 1 year and was given to select Honda motorcycle dealerships as a reward for good sales. So this machine, it is quite rare. It is 60 years old and it hasn't run in quite a long time. This machine was sent to me by a subscriber in Massachusetts named James, and he's had this for 20 years on a shelf in non-running condition. And before that, his father actually acquired it from a friend in non-running condition. So it's been at least 20 years, likely closer to 30 years since this last ran. So my hope today is to get this to run, or worst case, at least figure out why it's not running, potentially fix it, or at least know what parts we need to make this run again. So let me get you set up a little bit better and get going on this. So I'm actually going to start by checking the basics. I want to see what the compression is and also check for spark. Now, this is a points ignition system, so likely spark is going to be an issue. So hopefully we can get that sorted out. But before looking at either of those things, I know this was drained of oil before shipping, so I do want to get some oil in the crankcase before pulling the engine over. Anyway, for comparison, I did take out the Honda EX1000, which is considered a small machine. It only produces 900 watts, and as you can see, it is quite a bit larger than the little E40. Now, after publishing this video, there were definitely comments saying that, this machine is kind of useless. Only 900 watts? What can you do with that? Well, if you're one of those people, you might want to sit down for this one, because the E40 only produces 40 watts of power at 3,900 RPM. And it actually doesn't run at 60 hertz, doesn't run at 50 hertz. It runs at close to 200 hertz. So yeah, not very practical for powering modern devices. But that said, this is more a museum piece. It's a piece of history and definitely worth saving if we can. So that is the oil fill right there. And I think this is the points cover as well. So that's something we're likely going to have to dig into in a bit. So believe it or not, this only takes 80 cc's of oil. So I've measured that out, actually closer to 90 cc's, which is only about 0.1 quarts. So yeah, not a lot of oil to run this machine. Yeah, we are pretty much perfect. Maybe a touch over full. It's supposed to be actually in between the bottom and the top right there. So yeah, we are a touch over, but given how little oil this machine takes, I'd rather have a few extra milliliters in there. So we'll turn this around. The spark plug's on the other side, so we can get that out, check for compression, and check for spark. All right, let's give this a try. I'm going to start actually just by pulling the engine over slowly. Make sure it rotates, we don't have any funny noises. And it feels and sounds pretty good. You know, I also do feel compression, so I think we're going to have some. And in fact, the needle's already gone up to about 25 psi. Now, I don't know what the compression should be on this machine. It is a low compression flathead engine with about 5-to-1 compression. So, you know, I'm thinking we're not going to see a whole lot, maybe around 75 at best. So let's give it a few good pulls and see how high we can get. And we're at 60 psi. So yeah, it seems low, but that should be enough to do something. And in fact, I'm willing to bet it's going to run pretty well with that compression. So let's get the spark tester on there and see if we have spark. I've got the ignition switch turned on, so I'm going to pull the engine over. Just keep an eye on this right here, see if a spark jumps the gap. So unfortunately, I did not see a spark. So this tester, it is very good for detecting spark and doesn't give you a false reading. But what I am going to try is this tester. It tells you also if there's spark, but not how strong really the spark is. But what I want to see, hopefully, is that we get some signs of life on this tester. Yeah, spark, it's definitely an issue. You know, the fact that it couldn't jump this gap means it's not going to jump the gap on the plug. And this tester right here, it showed a tiny sign of life. I could see it very faintly lighting up, probably the faintest I have ever seen. So like that, we're never going to get ignition to this engine. So I'm going to get the points cover off and see if we can either make an adjustment or just clean the points to get spark back. So I am using a JIS screwdriver here. And these are really stuck. There we go, there's one. And two. So that is the contact pad right there for the points. You know, I don't see any signs of corrosion. The gap does look kind of big, but I'm not going to worry too much about the gap yet. To set that properly, there's actually a procedure where you need to time the flywheel and make some adjustments. So we'll do that if cleaning doesn't work. So I'm going to use a little bit of contact cleaner right there and some fine grit sandpaper, and we'll check for spark again. So the points have been cleaned. Honestly, they weren't that dirty, so I would doubt we have spark now, but let's just check real quick before moving on. And unfortunately, cleaning the points made no difference. This spark tester light is barely showing any signs of life. So, I think likely we have something else going on with the ignition system. So we need to get these side panels off to get a better look and start testing some of the internals. So the first thing I want to check is the timing of the points. There is an arrow right there, and there should be a corresponding line on the flywheel. So I'm going to rotate the engine until I see the points just start to open, and that's when spark should be generated, and hopefully those two marks are aligned. So right about there, that's where the points start to open. You can see we are aligned perfectly, so the points gap, it's not the issue. So I turn the machine around, and I'm going to start with the ignition switch. Could be something as simple as that. Right now it's in the on position, and when we close it, which is moving it to the left, you can see it moves this switch right here. So I think this is both a fuel valve as well as the ignition switch. So in the on position, the switch moves to the right, and you can see we are moved fully to the right. That said though, this could still be malfunctioning, so there is a wire coming off of it that runs down into that bundle. And it looks like we connect over to a condenser, and we also have the ignition coil over here. So, I think I'm going to start with the easiest thing, which is checking the function of this switch. So I'm going to get this bundle of wires out. We will disconnect them and test that this is working as expected. So the wire in question from the switch is this one right here, which was pinched in pretty hard and makes a hard corner right here. So potentially could be something as simple as that. So let me try to get this connector apart so we can test directly to the switch. There's not a lot of slack in these wires, so I'm going to try to loosen up that condenser to get us the slack we need. No, that is on there pretty tight. Let me try the impact. Yeah, unfortunately the plastic's pretty petrified, and I'm afraid even if I get it unplugged, it's gonna put a lot of stress on these wires, so I am just gonna cut it off. We can replace it with something else later when we get to that point. right, so let's test the switch. Right now I put this in the off position. I've got one lead already connected to ground. So when I touch this, I would expect it to ground out if that's how this ignition system works. And we're not getting a tone. Oh. Interesting. So we're in the off position. We should get a ground. And we do, kind of. Let's put it on. And no ground. So it is kind of working, although I would think shutting down might be a problem. But it seems to be working well now. So the switch, that's not the issue. So I'm going to use the multimeter to check the health of the coil. You know, there's a primary, which is this wire right here. And the secondary is the actual wire that runs to the spark plug. So if we put the multimeter to measure ohms, and we check from the primary to ground, we should see something fairly low. Like I'm thinking around 10 ohms or so. In this case, we're 4.8. So that's good. That's a fairly typical value. And the fact that it's not open circuit is a very good sign. So the primary of the coil seems to be good. And we'll do a similar test for the secondary. So one lead needs to touch the metal inside the boot, and the other lead touches ground. And on newer coils, really anywhere between 5 and 10,000 is pretty normal. You know, in this case, we're quite a bit higher, but I don't think I have a good connection. So let's try this again. And yeah, 9.5 thousand ohms on the secondary. So the coil does seem to be good. All right, now that the points are more or less isolated, we can check that as well with the multimeter. So this wire runs down to the condenser, which is connected to nothing. So I could remove it. I'm thinking we can just clip on right there. And when the points close, it should form a ground. So I'm just connecting the yellow wire to one of the probe leads. And the other one, I'm going to touch to ground. So right now, we do have a connection. I wouldn't say it's great. It's in the thousands, actually the millions. If we open the points, the connection goes away. We close the points, and it's back in the millions. So that's a problem, because that has to charge the coil. And when the points open, that's when we get the high voltage. And if there's high resistance there, like there is now, then likely the coil isn't charging sufficiently. So I take back what I said earlier. I think the issue is the points. You know, potentially we have condenser issues as well, but it should still spark even with a worn out condenser. So I think we need to actually get the points out and do a better job cleaning them. No, that is stuck in there pretty good. I don't think this has been apart for a very long time. So I'm going to try the impact on low, and hopefully that breaks free without breaking anything. Nice. All right, I just spent a minute, actually a couple minutes, cleaning these points real good. So we'll do the same test. Right now the points, they are closed. So if I touch right here with the probe, hopefully we get a low connection. And that's pretty good, 0.6 ohms. So if we open the points, goes to open, close the points, and we're back to about 0.6 ohms. So that is quite a bit better. So let's get these reinstalled. We'll set the point gap and check for spark. So I'm just rotating the engine until those timing marks align, which is right there. We'll make the adjustment, which is just pushing that until it's seated, which I think it already was. And then we snug it down. That should do it. All right, let's try this again. I've got everything reconnected except for the kill switch. So hopefully it shows some signs of life here as far as spark goes. Nice. You know what's next. So I'm going to feed this a little bit of two-stroke directly into the cylinder. All right, that should be enough. All right, let's give this a try. I've got a light plugged in and turned on. It's about 5 watts. Now, this generator, it is a permanent magnet generator. So even if I rotate the engine without the engine starting, likely that'll produce enough power to light that light. Of course, I want the engine to run. Ideally, we'll have an engine that runs and a generator that works. So let's give it a few pulls and see what we get. Generator works. Oh. Nice. Pretty impressive. This is a 60-year-old machine that hasn't run in at least 20 years. And it started second pull. The engine sounds great and we're making power. So everything critical here is working. We have spark, we have compression, we have timing. Fuel, that's a bit of an unknown. You know, hopefully this was last run before ethanol was in the fuel. Otherwise, we could have some issues. So I think the next move here is to get the carburetor off and just go through it, make sure it's clean. But to get it out, there are a lot of things kind of trapping it in. So we need to get a bunch of stuff out of the way so we can clean that carb up. Yeah, so given the age of this machine, I was kind of thinking about not pulling the carburetor. You know, potentially we could get away with just dropping the bowl, you know, pulling the jets out, cleaning those up, slap it back together, and likely this would run. You know, I want to do kind of as little as possible, or at least take apart as little as possible so I don't cause any damage to this machine. I can't get parts. A lot of these fasteners have been in there for 60 years. So I was going to try that, and then I realized we have a problem here with the governor arm. You know, this connects over to the governor, which is external to the engine. As the engine spins up, the weights push out. And you can see when that happens, this plate comes up. And what that's supposed to do is push against this arm to close the throttle plate, essentially taking off some spring tension and slowing the engine down. The problem is this does not move. and it should. So something is frozen up, between here and the throttle plate, and I'm willing to bet it's the throttle plate itself. So without question, we actually do have to pull the carb, as well as all the linkage and the governor, which I don't have the reset procedure for, so that might be difficult. And before I can even access a lot of the linkage and the bolts that hold the carb in place, I have to remove the ignition coil, which is attached to the tank. And all the electrical components are also attached to the tank. So it's definitely kind of snowballing, but I think, that's what we have to do if we want to get this thing back to 100%. And speaking of the tank, I did take a look inside. It's not terrible. This is the pre-filter right here. It's actually supposed to be in the tank. It's stuck to the cap. So we'll have to free that up. And there is a bunch of dust that we have to clean out. As far as the inside of the tank goes, looks like we're a little out of focus, but hopefully you can see it's not that bad. There is maybe some light surface rust. Could just be a bit of varnish, but nothing bad. I've seen way worse. So this tank, probably just needs to be rinsed out and likely will be okay. So I'm actually going to start by removing this tray on the bottom. There's only one screw holding it in. So once that's out, we can get the tray out of the way, as well as these two panels on the side, since they're all connected together. It wasn't too bad, actually, to get that tank off. The big hang-up was just the fuel lines. They weren't really letting go, and I wasn't 100% sure where or how they were supposed to let go, so I didn't want to force it, but they did finally release, and then we just got hung up here on this ground wire. So we got that disconnected, and now the tank, it's out of the way. We can disconnect the wires if we need to, but we don't, at least for now, so I'm going to leave that alone. But now we have much better access to the carburetor, and we can see all the linkages of the springs, and we can see where the governor arm goes. It connects over here, and then this wire goes down to the throttle plate. So, we should be able to free it up more easily, and actually it's moving. Yeah, so it wasn't that stuck. It's not returning though. At least not all the way. Yeah, so it is still gummed up, but the fact that it moves at all is a good sign. So let's get what we can disconnected, and ultimately we're gonna have to get that nut off right there and that one right there, and that should give us our prize. That one was loose. I feel like we need to take this shield off right here because the choke goes behind here and then there's linkage coming back. So, I think I need to get better access to that. Looks like we have an auto choke back here. So I think that freed this to come out. And now if we disconnect some of the linkages, we can get this arm out of the way. I think that's theoretically it. We do have a rod going through here where the auto choke was, but that I think will come out if we pull this out. And then we just have the throttle linkage, which is only connected to the carburetor. So yeah, let's get those two nuts off, and I think the carb will be free. That's pretty hard to believe. Look at the size of the carb throat. It's about the same diameter as a pencil. Insane. Anyway, let's get it cleaned up, and then we'll get it back together. All right, let's get this thing apart. We'll just start with the air filter. So it's held on by that clip. We've got a screen on either side. It's almost like the material that a screen on a door would be made out of. And some sort of filter media. And that's it. So not much filtering, but to be honest, most generators aren't running in a dirty environment. Up here we have the fuel valve. So we'll test that in a bit, see if fuel flows. And we also have two lines coming in, which I'm not quite sure why. If I had to guess, though, I'd say one is fuel and the other one likely a vent. Uh-oh. That's not good. I am pretty sure that's where the needle goes to meter the fuel. And without that, it doesn't matter how clean the carb is, it's never going to run. So that is a major problem. Let me double check the box, make sure it didn't fall out during shipping. But, given the varnish I see here, I'd say it's probably been out for some time. Not good. All right, check the box. Unfortunately, it's not there. And I checked the tray. I was hoping maybe it fell out, but I'm thinking someone pulled it out and just never put it back. So yeah, this carb, we need at least one part to get it to work. Now, I guess the good news is this looks somewhat like the carb on the E400. Not that that's easy to get either, but you know, there might be options as far as parts go. Anyway, let's get the bowl off. See if we have any other surprises. Yeah, a lot of varnish. I don't think it's rust though. That actually should clean up fine. I think the needle's moving. It's pretty gummed up. Main jet is clogged. So if that's the main jet, what's that? Could be the pilot jet. So yeah, I don't think it's going to run without that needle. So we might have to locate another carb, or maybe someone has a needle for sale. Regardless, I'm going to clean this up because this carb, I think, besides the missing part, looks to be in really good shape. All right, the pin is stuck. I'm not going to force it. Let's soak it like this. You know, we've got just about everything off that we need to. I'm not going to use any aggressive chemicals here. I think I'm just going to start with, you know, some hot water, some dish soap, you know, see where that gets us. And if that's not cutting it, we'll try something a little bit stronger. All right, so I haven't cleaned the carb yet. I'm kind of in a panic checking all my extra carbs. So, you know, I started with this bin. There's a lot of Japanese carbs in there made by NIKKI, Keegan. I think we have some Mikuni as well. And all those needles are too small in diameter. They're just not going to work. So pulled out a few more bins. I have some Subaru Mikunis here. No Joy, none of those fit. The Tecumseh carbs, of course, do not fit, being that they're not metric. And the Honda carbs, they don't fit either. They're all too small. None of the needles would thread in. They just kind of drop in the hole, which is not going to do us any good. So on a last-ditch effort or a whim, you know, I pulled out the Briggs bin, thinking there is no way. But it occurred to me, a lot of Briggs, they do use NIKKI carbs. And NIKKI carbs, they are made in Japan, like this one right here. So this one does not have a needle, but this one, which is also a NIKKI from a Vanguard, does have a needle right there. You know, this one has a limiter cap on it, but I have two of these. The other one is right over here, and it does not have a limiter cap. So pulled the needle out, and to my surprise, it fits. It threads in, and more importantly, that needle bottoms out. So we might be back in business here. So let's soak this carb for a bit. We'll reassemble it with this needle and hope for the best. So the carb's been soaking for about 15 minutes and it is cleaning up. You know, it's not quite there yet. There is still some debris that needs to be cleaned up, but I don't think the soap and water is going to do it. Likely we're going to have to switch to simple green. But before I do that, you know, we have maybe a bigger problem, or I shouldn't say a bigger problem, another problem. The fuel valve right now is on, and what I found is that this line is clear. This is just a vent. This line is for fuel, and there's no air going through, even when I lift up the float, which opens the needle. So we are clogged. Unfortunately, that pin has not freed up yet either. So I'm not going to force it, but I might have to. And yeah, bad things happen when you force that pin. So try not to if you can avoid it, especially if you can't get another carb. So I'm going to remove these screws right here for the fuel valve, get this cover off. And with any luck, the clog is up here instead of down here. Now, I can see light through there, so the clog is not down here. It's closer to the needle, or possibly, actually, it is. It's right there. So the fuel comes down through here, and I'm thinking, yeah, that is the clog. So let's see if we can get that cleared up. Yeah, it's coming right out, so we might be okay. So I think you get the idea. I'm just going to do this for a bit. You know, the flutes on the drill bit help extract the goo that's in there. I think the problem we're going to have, though, is that the needle, you know, some of this debris is still going to be in there. So it's going to most likely hang the needle a bit until we can flush all this out. But I'm hoping, you know, if we switch to something like simple green and give it another 10 or 15 minutes, the ultrasonic might get a lot of this out of there. Gonna stick with the soap and water for now. We'll give it another 10 or 15 minutes. So I ended up draining out the soapy water because despite clearing all that junk, it's still clogged. And the pin, it's still stuck. So we're gonna up the game a bit and try some simple green. All right, the carb, it is more or less done, and I think it's gonna work, you know, assuming this needle works out. You know, although it threads in, you know, does this needle actually bottom out? And is it wide enough? You know, that we're not gonna know until we try, but this passage is definitely clear. You know, I blew through it, air is going through, and I push the float up, the flow of air stops. So the needle and seat, they do seem to be working. So let's get this back together and see how well this carb is going to work. So let's get this jet in. This is the main jet. All right, that should be good. All right, we've got our mark. So let's get this needle installed. We'll lightly bottom it out and then just back up half a turn. All right, so we're bottomed out right there. There we go. So let's get this reinstalled and try it out. So I'm just reinstalling the linkage. The choke has to go on before you put or bolt the carb in place, because you have to get this through the little hole right there, which you can only do before you bolt the carb in place. Something's not right. It is keyed right there. So like this, it won't go in, but if I turn it to line up the key, it slides in, but then we hit kind of a hard stop. There we go. It was just this arm right here. It was kind of pinching it. All right, let's try to get the auto choke in there. And this is going to be impossible to show you, but this shaft right here, it's slotted. I think it goes in like that. And then this linkage right here that connects to the choke goes in that little hole right there on the bimetallic strip. So yeah, it's going to be a bit of a challenge, I think. So that works. The choke works. When I turn this clockwise, I see the spring tension increasing, so that works for the speed adjustment. And the governor seems to work. Although it was stuck for a second, so I'm going to put a few drops of oil just on all the pivot points to make sure we don't have the recurrence of that. So I'm thinking for now, actually, I'm going to leave the tank dry. Instead, I'm just going to fill up the carb. And that's not good. Yeah, it's flowing a bit better now. You know, this engine doesn't need a lot of fuel, so I'm hoping that that fuel flow is adequate. All right, we are all back together. The fuel did stop advancing, so the needle and seat, they do seem to be working. And I also reconnected the kill switch because we might need to shut it down pretty fast. You know, although this is no longer stuck, it is kind of sticky. So, you know, we could have a situation where the engine over revs, and I want to make sure we can shut it down quickly if that happens. So let's give it a few pulls and see what we get. All right, let's give this a try. The ignition is on. We'll turn the choke on. Let's try choke off. Almost. Give it a little more throttle. A little bit more throttle and chokes off. think we ran out of gas. But did we? And unfortunately, the carb, it has to come off again. You know, the needle and seat, they are having issues. You know, I noticed this wasn't accepting fuel. Every time it stalled, it seemed like it was full, meaning the bowl had no fuel in it. So I actually just put my finger over this off camera and started just squeezing the line. And what that did was push and pull the fuel. And after a couple times doing that, the fuel level dropped pretty rapidly. And I was able to top this off and the needle and seat closed. So there was definitely some junk in there. And then about a minute later, it just started flooding over, and now the needle will not close. So there's definitely stuff in there causing interference with the normal operation of the needle and seat. So unfortunately, I've got to pull this off again and get the float and the needle out without breaking this carburetor. So I'm going to pause it. I'll turn you back on in a second when we're ready to resume surgery on this carburetor. All right, we're back here again. And I gotta say, taking it off the second time was a lot easier than the first. You know, now that I know how it comes apart and goes together, not too bad actually. That said though, I don't want to make a habit of this, so hopefully this is the last time. Yeah, some chunks just came out too. This cup wasn't spotless, but a lot of those chunks in there were in the bowl. So a lot of stuff was kind of self-clearing, but I think we're at the point now where there's just, you know, a big chunk kind of messing things up. So, you know, the fuel is also a solvent. That's why, you know, it's continuing to clean the passages. Potentially, the needle will move this time. Yeah, unfortunately, the pin is not budging, so I'm going to tap it very, very gently. Don't like doing that, and in fact, the last time I did that, things didn't go so well, but I was hitting that one pretty hard. Ah. You know, the thing that really concerns me is that, you know, these arms are super thin, you know, thinner than most. So it would take very little force to break one of those off. And if that happens, we're done. Nope, it's not budging. Really, all I can do is just run some fuel through it and try to get any last bits out of there. All right. Cleaned it up the best I can. So I'm going to get this back on the machine. We'll try running it again. And hopefully we get a better result. All right, we're all back together again. You can see now how quickly the fuel advances. And hopefully the needle shuts off. Yep, needle shut off. So let's give it a try. So similar to the first time we started it, it started slow and then it picked up speed, and I attributed that to the auto choke. But I don't think that's the case anymore. You know, the needle and seat, they are working. What I'm noticing is that when I top off the fuel, meaning the bowl is full, the generator becomes super rich. And I think it's because the needle isn't actually reaching where it's supposed to reach. So now that the bowl is actually fixed, it's full. And it's just highlighting the fact that this needle's not doing what it should, and it's flooding the engine out. So I'm going to give it a second. I'm going to try to restart it. I'm going to let the fuel run down. And if the speed picks up again, then I think that kind of proves that we're just putting too much fuel in past that needle. It's the best run yet. It just ran 10 minutes, and it would have run longer, but I've seen enough. The needle and seat, they are working. The carburetor's working quite well. The needle, not doing a great job. As long as I don't fill the bowl up all the way, then things run just fine. So, the carb, I would say, is as good as I can get it until I get the proper part. That said, I haven't located said part. So if anybody watching has a parts carb for this machine, or they know someone that has a parts carb for this machine, let me know, because I definitely want to buy a needle or a whole parts carb if available. Anyway, there's not a whole lot more to do other than put this back together, but I'm thinking before I do that, let's clean the tank anyway. It's not that dirty, and we only need to soak it in Evaporust for about half a day, and I think the tank should be good to go. So I've decided not to disconnect the wires or remove the capacitor. I don't think I need to. I can stand this up or prop this up and just fill it with the Evaporust. So I'm just using a vacuum cap to plug where the fuel line connects, and we'll just screw that in. So that'll plug off the tank. We do have a vent, but I'm pretty sure that goes up to the handle. So we shouldn't leak from there, but I think I will cap that just to make sure. I'm not sure how well that comes across, but there are some little chunks of that yellow stuff breaking free. It's a slow process. The acetone's been in there for about 24 hours. In the middle, I did swap it out for about an hour with mineral spirits, hoping it would work faster, and the mineral spirits didn't seem to do anything, so I put the acetone back in. Anyway, I think we're at the point in the project where I'm going to call it good enough for now, because until we get the carb issue sorted out, we can't run it on the tank anyway. So I'm going to drain the acetone out. We'll dry the tank out and then put it back together. Well, I know you just watched me put this thing together, but that was actually 6 weeks ago. I wanted to give it a little bit more time to find the needle I need to make this thing 100%. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to locate a single part for sale for this carburetor. So I was about to turn the camera back on and wrap things up when a subscriber named Ryan reached out. He's actually emailed me in the past offering his services as a machinist, and he was just reminding me of that offer. So I sent him a link to the video you just watched so he'd understand the problem here. And he accepted the challenge of machining a needle for this, not even having any pictures of what it should look like. So, I did send him the NIKKI needle, which at least threaded into the carb. And based on that, he did machine 2 needles. And he actually made a video out of it. It's a very good video, so I'm going to link to that up above and down in the description. Unfortunately, those needles, although they did thread in, they didn't change the way the engine ran. So he made 2 more variations, which are actually right here. And they came out really nice, and they thread into the carb, but it was the same result as the first 2. So I decided to shortcut the process and just made a post on my community tab asking if anybody out there had an E40 generator. And thankfully, someone named Scott reached out, and he pulled the needle from his E40. He took a couple pictures and sent a bunch of detailed measurements. So I forwarded that information along to Ryan, and based on that, he machined another needle. So I am cautiously optimistic that this will fix the problem that we have here. So let's get this needle installed and try this one more time. So this is the needle here based on the measurements that Scott sent to us. And as you can see, we were kind of guessing at what it should look like. We didn't know the length and we didn't know the diameter, but with the detailed measurements Scott sent us, this is a very close replica of what should be in there. So yeah, let's get it in and try it out. All right, right there, it's bottomed out. Just back it up a little bit, and we'll fine tune it once it's running. Yeah, I think that did it. The carb is running the engine quite a bit better. And I'm sorry to say that I think the earlier issues were due to user error. I had assumed this needle was a fuel screw, meaning when you turn it in, you reduce the amount of fuel. Instead, this is actually an air screw. So by turning it in, I was actually reducing the amount of air, not the amount of fuel, which is why the engine was bogging down so bad. So with that new understanding, I backed this needle out and things leaned up and the engine ran quite a bit better. So I think the carb issue is sorted out. So that only leaves the tank, and we've already tried a few things with that, including evaporust and several different solvents, and it didn't really do a whole lot. So I'm thinking we'll give it another go. I do have citric acid. I also have vinegar, so I'm going to try vinegar to start with and see if we make any progress on this tank. So I do have stronger acids available, but I want to start conservative because this tank, we can't replace it. So if I burn a hole through it, then the tank is done. And like it is right now, it would probably work. So all I'm trying to do is make it a little bit better. We'll give that some time and we'll check back. Well, it's been about 5 days and it is definitely doing something. There's a lot of chunks floating around in there. So I'm thinking I'm just going to drain out kind of what's in there right now, and we'll get some fresh vinegar in the tank and give it some more time. You can see here some of the chunks that came out. So the vinegar, it is definitely working. And the tank, not clean yet, but there is a noticeable improvement. So yeah, let's get some vinegar back in there and we'll give it another week or so. Well, it's been a couple more weeks and I'm not seeing a whole lot of progress. So yeah, the vinegar, I'd say it's not strong enough, but it is loosening it up. I noticed if I took a Q-tip and just kind of, manually tried cleaning the bottom of the tank, it is coming right off. So I'm thinking at this point, let's disconnect the wires. I've been trying to avoid that because I just don't want to break anything or disconnect anything that I don't need to. But in this case, I think I do. So we get the wires disconnected, we'll get the vinegar out. I think I'm just going to use some water and BBs to shake around in that tank and hopefully clean that junk out of there. And the acid too, it also caused some sort of buildup of corrosion here around where the fuel comes out. So I don't know really what that's about, but that I do not want to get damaged. So let's see if we can get these wires out of this clip. It doesn't seem too flexible. Yeah, I'm not liking how I can't move this sleeve. It seems to be, I don't know if that's melted or crimped. Because I can't move the sleeve, really the only way to try to unplug this would be to pull on the wire, which I'm afraid I'm just going to pull it out of the connector. So I think the better course here is I'm just going to cut a little bit of this away so I can grab onto the metal to unplug it. And then I'll have to use some shrink tubing when putting this back together just to keep this properly insulated. and we're free. It's amazing. About 30 seconds of shaking, and I can see a very big difference already. So do that a few more times, and I think we'll be in pretty good shape. And there's a look at the junk that came out of the tank. So quite a bit cleaner, for sure, than before we started. So all the BBs are out. I am going to neutralize the acid just using some sodium carbonate. We'll mix that around, run that through, and then I'm going to dry it with a bit of alcohol. So there's an up-close look at the end result. Not perfect, for sure, but definitely a lot better than where we started. So, at this point, I think I'm going to pause the video. I'm just going to get this fully back together. Then we'll try to run it one last time, but this time from the tank. Well, guys, that's pretty much a wrap. Going into this, I knew it was going to be a challenge given the fact that this is a 60-year-old machine that hadn't run in at least 20 years. And of course, parts are non-existent for it. Thankfully, we didn't need too many parts. The big exception, though, being that needle. Without it, I thought we were dead in the water. And thankfully, 2 subscribers came forward and offered their assistance. So without Scott and Ryan's help, this would not have been possible. So thank you guys for that. I'm also going to leave a link to Ryan's video down in the description. He made a great video just showing the process of machining this needle. Anyway, I think it goes without saying, this is not going to power your house. It's not going to power your campsite, but it is Honda's first unofficial generator. It is a very rare machine and definitely worth preserving. So I wanted to thank James again for sending this one to us. I learned a lot. So I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.